Happy to. Um, Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this snowy Friday. I hope everyone is staying warm. I'm Nell Zeal. I am the Chief of the Office of Planning, Education, and Outreach with the Maryland Historical Trust. And today we are going to do an overview of our financial incentive programs for you all. This is something that we do annually. And I'm going to give a little introduction to MHT, and then I will be talking about the Museum Assistance Program first, and we'll go through the sequence. I would ask for everyone to hold your questions until the end, although you are welcome to put them in the chat, which my colleague Brenna here will be moderating. We are recording this meeting, so just want to make you aware of that and let us know if you have any questions about that. So without further ado, the Maryland Historical Trust is the state agency dedicated to preserving and interpreting the legacy of Maryland's past. We have a number of federal programs that we administer as the State Historic Preservation Office, and then also a number of state funded and appropriated programs that we administer on behalf of Maryland. And most of the programs that we're going to cover today are state programs, not federal programs. We are governed by a 15-member board of trustees, which is fairly unusual for a state agency. We have administrative headquarters in Crownsville, but we also operate Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum in Southern Maryland. We are part of the Maryland Department of Planning. Yeah, I think that's enough. Brenna, you can go ahead and change slides. So to give you a little bit of an overview of the Museum Assistance Program, you can change slides. This is a program that has not given grants since 2011. So it's been some time, and it's really due to the advocacy of folks in the historical and museum community that these funds have returned for fiscal year 2026. We do have $285,000 to give away as grants, and based on feedback from the museum community over many years, we have decided to offer this round of grants as operational support grants. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. So eligible applicants are, as I mentioned, historical and cultural museums. They need to be in operation for 3 or more years. They need to be in good standing with the state in order to qualify. And those museums can be run by nonprofits, as a nonprofit organization, or as a museum that's administered by the local government. Museums that are run in whole or in part by the state or federal government cannot apply for these funds. That is one of the restrictions. For this round, we do not have a match requirement, which we hope will help museums of all sizes come in for this funding. As I mentioned, the upcoming year, the funding is entirely for operational support, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. We do not have a minimum grant, but we do have a $20,000 maximum grant. We do anticipate that the competition for this program is going to be fairly strong. So I'm not sure how many $20,000 grants we will actually award. I think it's more likely that we'll be awarding in the $10,000 to $15,000 range, but we won't know until we have the applications in hand and it's gone through the review process. Next slide, please. So I've had a few questions about the program since we opened the round, which is currently open, and the deadline is December 31st. Folks have called to ask if they qualify as a museum. And so, as I mentioned, you need to operate as a nonprofit, either administered by a nonprofit or by a local government. That means that they need to be geared essentially for education or preservation purposes, and that language is pulled from the statute. You need to have collections, which means that you need to have tangible objects and care for them and display them. That does not need to be part of your application per se, so you don't need to come in for collections care. But that is one of the threshold questions that you'll see in the application to help us determine eligibility. And the museum needs to interpret Maryland's, quote, cultural heritage or history, natural history, or history of science and technology. So that is fairly broad in terms of the topic areas that you can cover as a museum. I've had a few folks ask about whether or not a single applicant can apply for multiple museums if you administer multiple museums, and that is mostly local governments that are in that situation. The application is really geared to help us review museums on a case-by-case basis, so individually. So we would ask that you apply for one museum per application. I have also had folks ask about next year. And the truth is, because the funding was lapsed for so long, it is difficult for us to anticipate whether or not this money will be available again next year. Certainly we hope so, but it is not guaranteed. So if this is funding that you would like for your museum, I would encourage you to come in for this year. Next slide. So operating support is really intended to help offset expenses from the routine operation of the museum. So staff salaries and benefits are a popular choice. Professional development and accreditation for the museum can also qualify, as well as operational plans, disaster plans, things like that. Rent and utilities, basic maintenance for the museum, and other kinds of routine costs like environmental monitoring, security systems, and things like that. In terms of ineligible costs, we will not be able to use this money to fund any capital costs, and that includes system installations, trail or exhibit development or installations, as well as archival collections care and management. All of those categories are broadly eligible for this program, but not for this round. So if we do get additional funds in the future and we're able to allocate more towards project costs, we will look at some of those categories. Next slide, please. And this is just a rundown of the selection criteria that we will be using to evaluate the grants. These are all in our grant guidelines, which are available online on the Museum Assistance Program grants page. But I just wanted to give you a sense of the categories that we will be looking at. Because these are operational support grants, these categories are fairly broad. And because it's our first round in many years, it's a little bit difficult for me to anticipate exactly how we'll be reviewing these and what might score favorably. But we encourage you to align yourselves with the selection criteria to the extent possible in your application, and help us make the case when we're pitching it to the review committee. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that the deadline this year is December 31st. That was the absolute last date that we felt, we wanted to give you as much time as possible. I do want to say that we will not be working after 5 p.m. on December 31st. So please make sure if you have any questions that you get those into me before that deadline, but you will have up until midnight of that day to actually submit your application. After that, there's a review panel that will review the grants and make recommendations for funding over the course of the next few weeks following the application close. And then those recommendations are presented to the MHT board in March, and they will create a final set of recommendations that will then go to the MDP secretary, so the Secretary of Planning, for review and approval. And that's it. Next slide. So this is my contact information, and you're welcome to ask me any questions. Email is absolutely the best way to reach me with questions for this program. I try to be very prompt in response, but I'll also be around to answer your questions in the chat. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll turn it over to Matt McKnight to present on the Historic Preservation Non-Capital Grant Program.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Matt McKnight, and I'm the Chief Archaeologist at the Maryland Historical Trust. And I, along with my counterpart, Heather Barrett, who administers the architectural projects, we co-administer the Historic Preservation Non-Capital Grant Program. Next slide. So what is this program? This is set up for research, survey, planning, and educational activities involving architectural, archaeological, or cultural resources in Maryland. We typically see about $300,000 each year that are distributed from the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority Financing Fund for these projects. Eligible applicants include nonprofit organizations, as well as state and federal agencies. They are treated as nonprofits under this program. So if anybody from a sister state agency has joined, you are eligible for these grants. And then finally, local jurisdictions. There are some different match requirements depending on which category your organization falls into. Local governments have to provide a one-to-one cash or in-kind match for the grant. But there is no match requirement for nonprofit organizations. And again, state agencies and federal agencies are treated similar to nonprofits. So, but in knowing that, providing some match will actually make your application more competitive. So we evaluate the match, but we don't require match. Next slide. These are some of the types of projects that can be undertaken with this type of these types of grants. Architectural and archaeological survey work, that's a big one. This is one of the only ways that we are able to get baseline survey work done throughout the state. National Register nominations, historic structures reports, thematic research that supports the development of new historic contexts for the state, preservation plans for your property, and education and outreach activities. Next slide. There are some special priorities for the FY27 grant round. These haven't changed in a few years. They do get updated every once in a while. But as of right now, these are the things that we're looking specifically to try and fund. And those are broad-based, comprehensive, and systematic archaeological or architectural surveys to identify and document previously unknown, little studied, or threatened resources. Then projects designed to assess, document, or address the impacts of climate change, natural disasters, any kind of ongoing natural processes on cultural resources. And then finally, projects that undertake detailed, in-depth study of a specific topic, site period, property type, or theme. Next slide. There are, of course, a number of ineligible projects, and go figure, capital expenditures are not eligible under a non-capital grant program. But documentation, display of museum collections are one of those categories that are ineligible. Sometimes we do one sort of gray area for that, and something that we have funded in the past are projects to bring collections up to meet state standards. So that is something that we have funded, but putting money towards an exhibit is not something we would typically fund in the non-capital grant program. Archival projects that seek to conserve or catalog historic collections are ineligible. Publications of previously completed manuscripts are ineligible. And projects that are already underway or completed prior to execution of the grant agreement are typically ineligible. Next slide. There are some program requirements for anybody who comes in for one of these grants. First and foremost, if you're conducting architectural, archaeological research, survey, and documentation, the end product that you produce needs to meet MHT's standards and guidelines. So we have a standards and guidelines document for standing structures, and there is also standards and guidelines for archaeology. One word of note, the next grant round, we will probably be operating under new archaeology standards and guidelines. We recently released a draft and received comments from the public on that. And I anticipate that before the next grant round, we will have actually published the new standards and guidelines for archaeology in Maryland. So they will be probably operating under the new system. Also, personnel that are performing architectural or archaeological work must meet the minimum requirements of the Secretary of the Interior's professional qualification standards under 36 CFR 61. So the person needs to have the credentials to support that they are a professional architectural historian or archaeologist. Next slide. These are the selection criteria that we are usually looking at. A big one is significance. So if you're looking, when you're putting your application together, these are the key things that we're looking at in that application. Again, big one being significance. How significant is the project area or the property that's being studied? Urgency, are the resources imminently endangered, or is there a significant window of opportunity, such as you're having construction or repair work done on a historic structure and it's going to be sort of somewhat deconstructed and open for people to do assessments on it. So things like that for urgency. Project design, we're looking at the scope and protective value of what you're planning to do, the goals involved, and how well put together your project design is. Project value, that's long-term preservation or documentation of the cultural resource. So is it going to help preserve it? Educational outreach components, that's pretty self-explanatory. Innovation, is it something that could serve as a model for future projects? The project's impact, the professional capability of the team that you have put together. How ready are you to get out in the field and do the work? What contributed funds are there? So that's match, or if you're not required to produce match, how much are you contributing to the project, if any? And then we really look very carefully at equitable geographic distribution across the state. So we will look at a set number of projects from the past several years and look to see does yours fill a gap that we currently have in our data sets. And then finally, those FY 2026 priorities that I mentioned on a previous slide. Next. We had a little bit of drama in the last grant cycle that ended up pushing back our typical grant cycle. So we were having some issues with the funding getting released. That was eventually resolved, but it pushed our grant cycle back farther than it usually is. I've put on the slide here what our more typical grant cycle looks like, which is what we're expecting for this year. We are usually launching with a virtual workshop in mid-May, so you watch our webpage for that. There is a two-stage application process, both undertaken online, and the first stage of that is the intent to apply form. Those are usually due around the beginning of July, end of June sometime, with the full application being due in the beginning of August or end of July. Grant awards are typically, the award letters are typically sent out around mid-November. What happens is the applications come in, and a panel of staff will take a look at those grant applications. Then we make recommendations to the MHT Board of Directors. Those recommendations are usually approved, and then they go to the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Planning for final award signature, and then we can send out those grant agreements. So we're usually sending that to the board in October, so that means it's usually about mid-November by the time the letters are actually going out. We had the project, the grant program funded for $300,000 in FY 2026. We expect that will be carried over the same amount for FY 2027. The cap for individual projects is $75,000. As I mentioned, there's a two-step application project. And as you can see, for FY 2026, MHT received 24 grant applications for this program, totaling over $1.1 million in requests. And with only $300,000 available, that means it's a very competitive grant program. Next slide. So now I'm going to talk about, just real quickly, a few examples. These are from recent years. In FY 25, we funded the From Trials to Teaching K-12 Teacher Workshop. This was a week-long archaeology boot camp, which was held at North Point State Park and facilitated by Digging Deeper Educational Consulting. And the purpose of it was to help K-12 teachers in Maryland schools earn Maryland State Department of Education credits, which they are required to earn. But this was specifically geared towards them earning these MSD credits while developing curricula for social studies courses that were centered on responsible archaeology. And so that happened recently at North Point State Park. Next slide. St. John's College, in a recent grant project, conducted documentation and examination of the history of the enslaved people in relation to the St. John's campus and its history. So that's a project that occurred in Annapolis recently. Next slide. And then finally, there's a GPR project that was conducted recently, ground penetrating radar survey of the Emmanuel Episcopal Church campus. That's a non-invasive examination strategy that was looking at the former location of the 18th century French and Indian War fort known as Fort Cumberland, which eventually became the city of Cumberland. Next slide. And so with that, that's the basic overview of our historic preservation non-capital grant program. You can reach out if you have questions about the standing structure side of things. You're best reaching out to Heather Barrett, the Administrator of Architectural Research. Or if it's an archaeology project, you can reach out to me, and our contact information is up there on the screen. Thanks.
And with that, thank you, Matt. We'll turn it over to Stacy.
Thank you so much. So I'm Stacy Montgomery. I'm the Capital Programs Administrator at MHT, and today I'll be discussing MHT's 3 capital programs that support brick and mortar projects. Those are the African American Heritage Preservation Program, which I'm going to call the AAHPP for short, the Historic Preservation Capital Grant, and the Historic Preservation Capital Loan Program. These are all competitive programs, so I'll give you an overview of each program, and then I'll talk about the details about eligibility and requirements and things like that. Next slide, please. So first, let's talk about the AAHPP program. This program is a partnership between the Maryland Historical Trust and the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. The AAHPP was founded in 2010 by the General Assembly, but since 2023, the annual allocation for this program has been $5 million, which allows applicants to ask for funding from anywhere from $10,000 to $250,000 per request. The awardees of this grant are chosen by a committee of the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. The grant funds capital improvements to sites that are important to African American history and culture in Maryland, but sites do not need a specific historic designation to be eligible for funding. The applications for this program typically open in early spring and close in the summer, and awards are typically announced in late December or early January. So next slide, please. The Historic Preservation Capital Grant program promotes the acquisition, restoration, and rehabilitation of historic properties in Maryland. So eligible properties are limited to those that are listed in or determined eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, either individually or as a contributing structure within a historic district. The appropriation for this program was just increased this year to $1 million, so we're very excited about that. The maximum individual award is capped at $100,000. Applications for the Historic Preservation Capital Grant Program typically are available in February and close in mid-March, with decisions made by the end of June or early July each year. Next slide, please. So the Historic Preservation Capital Loan Program is one of the oldest programs we have. It was established in 1973 to encourage the preservation of historic properties statewide. The loan can fund acquisition, refinancing, rehabilitation, and in certain cases, pre-development costs. There have actually been over 85 projects that have received funding through this program. This year, up to $300,000 in funds are available through this program, and MHT can accept loan applications throughout the year until all the funds have been awarded. So interested applicants for this program should reach out to MHT staff, and my contact information will be at the end. But please reach out to MHT staff before submitting an application for the loan program, as it requires some in-depth conversations before moving forward. Next slide, please. So who are eligible for these programs? The programs can provide funding to nonprofits, local governments, businesses, and individuals for each program. For the Historic Preservation Capital Grants, all applicants except for nonprofit organizations are required to provide a dollar-for-dollar match to whatever grant they're provided. State and federal agencies are eligible to apply as nonprofits, and there's no match requirement for the AHPP program. While eligible, private, residential, and commercial properties usually are not competitive for these programs unless they are of exceptional historical significance or have some substantial public benefit, like an established educational program. For the loan program, business entities and individuals must demonstrate an inability to obtain traditional financing for their project. All applicants should be aware that their project must have a strong public engagement component to be competitive. Next slide, please. So who are eligible for these grants, or what types of properties are eligible? For the AAHPP program, eligible properties, as I mentioned before, do not have to have a historic designation to apply. However, the site must have historic or cultural significance to the African American experience in Maryland. Examples of eligible properties for the AHPP include sites like museums, cemeteries, churches, community centers, and schools, to name a few. For the capital grant and loan programs, those are limited to sites which are listed in or determined eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, either individually or as a contributing structure within a district. This determination is made by the National Register staff here at MHT, and interested applicants should reach out to us to determine if their site is eligible. Next slide, please. If you're a religious site, you are eligible to apply. However, for religious buildings, expenses are generally limited to exterior work and secular spaces if the building is actively used for worship. This means that funds will not cover work on interior space in spaces like the sanctuary. However, if there's work that needs to be done in a fellowship hall or a kitchen or a restroom, funds would cover that project. Work in cemeteries, including marker restoration, ground penetrating radar, and cemetery mapping, are eligible for funding. So next slide, please. Here you can see on the map a list of the different types of work that are eligible for these three programs. For the capital grants and loans, they can pay for activities including acquisition, rehabilitation, and restoration. Pre-development costs such as studies, surveys, plans and specifications, architectural and engineering studies, things like that are directly related to a capital project are eligible under the AHPP, and under the capital grant program, but only for nonprofits and governments agencies. New construction and additions can only be funded by the AHPP program, and the loan program can fund refinancing of an existing loan. Work that is already underway or completed is not eligible for funding. A complete list of ineligible expenses are available on our website, but again, everything must be construction or construction related to be eligible. Next slide, please. So all awards are subject to MHT review and need to comply with the Secretary of the Interior standards for treatments of historic properties. The Secretary of the Interior standards are a set of guidelines for work on historic properties that were created by the National Park Service that as a state agency we're obligated to follow. Grant projects that are funded through these grants must protect and retain historic features and materials to retain a property's history and sense of place. MHT staff will help ensure that any project that receives a grant meets those standards. So next slide, please. All capital grant and capital loan projects are required to convey either a preservation easement or a preservation agreement to the Maryland Historical Trust. For the African American Heritage Preservation Program, only projects involving properties that are individually listed on or individually eligible for the National Register will be required to convey a preservation easement or agreement to MHT. But for the capital grant and loan program, it is a requirement for all awardees. A preservation easement is a legal contract between MHT and the property owner. The easement is recorded in the local land records and stays with the property for a set amount of time. The easement helps to protect buildings, structures, and associated archaeological resources on the property, and it requires MHT approval of work on your property before it begins for the life of the easement, not just the grant term. So next slide, please. I wanted to provide a couple of examples of previously awarded projects. One here is the Easton Armory in Easton, Maryland, in Talbot County, which received a historic preservation capital grant to repair their historic metal windows. The windows were deteriorated and really hard to operate. So following the Secretary of the Interior standards, the windows were carefully repaired, repainted, and reinstalled throughout the building. So now they're very functional. Next slide, please. Another example of a property that actually received several African American Heritage Preservation Program grants is the St. Paul Church located in Denton, Maryland, in Caroline County. They received funds to stabilize the church, rebuild the foundation, repair the siding, and replace the roof. Ahead of the physical rehabilitation, the grant also funded some pre-development costs, including the preparation of construction documents by an architect. The project also required the removal of hazardous materials like asbestos, which was also funded by the grant. Next slide, please. So the project timeline, every grant has its own cycle. The AHPP workshops are generally held in the spring when the application opens, and the AHPP application is generally open from April to about the 1st of July, with an award announcement made in late December or early January. For HPCAP, workshops are usually held in late fall or early winter, so they'll be soon. And the application opens in early February. The application closes in mid-March, and grant awards are announced in June. So dates and locations for workshops and webinars are posted on the program website and shared to MHT's social media. As I said before, the capital loan can accept applications year-round so long as funding remains, but interested applicants are highly encouraged to schedule a meeting with MHT staff, the grant staff, ahead of submitting an application to discuss what funding is available and ensure that you have all the proper paperwork and an eligible project. There's no intent to apply required for any of these programs. And as I mentioned before, there's no match required for the AHPP program. Next slide, please. So here's my contact information as well as the contact information for the other capital grant staff. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Stacy. And now we'll turn it over to Carrie Jones to talk to us about tax credits.
Thank you, Nell. My name is Carrie Jones, and I'm one of the tax credit administrators at the Maryland Historical Trust. Next slide, please. The Historic Revitalization Tax Credit is MHT's primary incentive program for owners of historic houses and income-producing buildings. The program offers a credit towards your state of Maryland income taxes equal to 20% of the qualified rehabilitation expenses. The state of Maryland has 3 tax credit programs. You can see them here. One is for homeowners, one is for owners of small commercial buildings, and one is for owners of large commercial buildings. In the next few slides, I will explain the 3 different tax credit program MHT has, some key terms, and how the credit works. Next slide, please. As mentioned, we do have the 3 tax credit programs. We also help administer the Federal Historic Rehabilitation Tax Credit. Each program has different timeframes and deadlines, and each program also has different credit amounts. I will explain those in the following slides. We also do, as I said, mention the Federal Tax Credit Program, and detailed information about each of these programs is available on our website. Next slide, please. For homeowners, MHT offers up to $50,000 in tax credits. The work must be completed within 24 months of starting, and we accept applications all year long for this program. Next slide, please. For the small commercial tax credit, it's similar to the homeowner in that it's also upwards of $50,000 per year, $50,000 per project, excuse me, and the work must be completed in 24 months. The rehabilitation expenses, however, cannot exceed $500,000 for this one, and the credits are awarded on a first-come, first-served basis. The program is typically reauthorized every year at an amount of $2 million. Next slide, please. For much larger commercial buildings, we have the competitive commercial tax credit. This program offers up to $5 million in credits for projects that meet certain eligibility requirements. MHT accepts applications for this program on an annual basis, with the deadline typically being August 31st. Work for these projects must start within 18 months of the credits being awarded, and additional credits can be awarded for projects that have LEED certification, include low-income housing, and or are located in an opportunity zone. Next slide, please. In order to apply for any of the tax credit programs, you must either be an owner or a representative of a historic building, which includes buildings that are listed in the National Register or are locally listed as an individual building, contributing to a National Register district or a local district, properties that are pending such designation, and properties that are within a certified heritage area with documentation from the MHAA that justifies the eligibility. There are some nonprofits that can apply, and that is a detailed question that I'm happy to answer via email. Next slide, please. The application process is a 3-step process. Each application is named the Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. The Part 1 and Part 2 can be submitted together, and they must be reviewed and approved prior to starting any work. The Part 1 certifies that the property is eligible for the program, and it must include interior and exterior photographs. The Part 2 certifies that all of the proposed work meets the Secretary of the Interior standards, and included in the Part 2 must be a detailed description of all proposed work, whether it's eligible for the credit or not. And then the Part 3 certifies that the project was completed in accordance with the Part 2. You submit this when the project is done, and you also submit all expenses. Next slide, please. So when should you apply? Prior to starting any work. As I mentioned before, all work has to be reviewed and approved prior to beginning work. The homeowner, we do accept applications all year long. The small commercial is as funding allows, and the competitive commercial has the deadline, as I mentioned before. Next slide, please. In terms of eligible work items, all work must conform to the Secretary of the Interior standards, which Stacy mentioned a bit in her presentation. When we look at these for the tax credit program, we want to make sure that the historic character of the building is preserved, that distinctive features and spaces that are important to the building are retained, that the materials and finishes, such as exterior siding, slate roofs, and interior plaster is repaired and not replaced. And then new construction and additions are allowed, but they have to be compatible with the historic building. Next slide, please. In terms of eligible expenses are capital expenses that return or maintain a building to a state of utility. As you can see, that includes roof replacements, window and door restoration, wall and siding repair and painting, brick repointing or any structural work that might be required, floor refinishing, HVAC, plumbing, and electric upgrades to bring a building up to code, architectural and engineering fees, and also historic outbuildings, including both barns and garages. Next slide, please. In terms of how to claim the credit when the work is done, this is handled jointly between MHT and the Comptroller's Office, because remember, this is a tax credit against your state of Maryland income taxes for the year the project is complete. This is not a grant that you draw against. This is you will incur the expenses up front and then be refunded as part of the tax credit. So when the project is complete, you submit the Part 3 application with a complete set of photographs and accounting of all expenses, and MHT will certify that. Once MHT certifies that, you will attach that documentation to the tax credit, and that'll be handled through the Comptroller's Office like any other tax credit. It is fully refundable, meaning you will receive the difference between what you owe on your taxes and the amount of the credit. For commercial projects, the credit can be allocated to another person in the organization. However, that is a private agreement between two private individuals and doesn't involve MHT. Next slide, please. Some additional information. The tax credit program does not require that MHT take an easement on the property, and public access or public programming is not required. After the project is certified as complete with the Part 3 application, any additional work will require review and approval by MHT for a period of 5 years. Both tax credits can be combined with the local and federal credits in addition to any grant programs. However, any grant programs will need to be backed out. But for some of our larger projects, people do combine both the tax credit and some of our grant programs. And then each program does have different timelines and review fees, and I recommend that you consult our website for more information on that. Next slide, please. Some of the key takeaways is all projects require a Part 1 and Part 2 application, including a complete set of photographs that should be submitted before work begins. If you start doing work prior to approval, that can invalidate your approval and your ability to claim the credit. All work must meet the Secretary of the Interior standards, whether the costs are eligible or ineligible for the tax credit. And we strongly encourage you to get in touch with tax credit staff early on in your project planning process to discuss eligibility requirements, application, and to review any proposed work items. Next slide, please. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Here is my contact information, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions during the Q&A.
Thank you, Carrie. And now we'll turn it over to Martha to talk about the Heritage Areas program.
Thanks, Nell. Hi, everybody. My name is Martha Waldron, and I am one of the assistant administrators with the Maryland Heritage Areas program. And I help administer this program along with my colleagues Andrew Arvizu and Ariane Hofstede. Next slide, please, Brenna. The Maryland Heritage Areas program designates, supports, and collaborates with certified heritage areas and their partners to create place-based experiences for the public that preserve and promote Maryland's unique stories and contribute to the well-being of local economies. You can see here on the slide, we have a lovely Venn diagram to show you the focus areas that this grant program is keen on promoting. Heritage is at the center with community enhancement, tourism, and sustainability surrounding it. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that plays out for the grants in just a minute. Next slide, please. You all may be familiar with the acronym MHAA, and I'd like to explain what that is. MHAA stands for the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority. It is an independent unit of government within the executive branch that operates in the Department of Planning and is administered by the Maryland Historical Trust. The MHAA is essentially the governing body of the Maryland Heritage Areas program. And one of the primary activities of the authority and the program is to award capital and non-capital project grants that highlight Maryland's diverse heritage, enhance local communities, and promote tourism and economic development within one or more of Maryland's 13 certified heritage areas. Funding for the Maryland Heritage Areas program is allocated annually from the Department of Natural Resources program Open Space. And since 1996, the authority has awarded more than $74 million in grants to hundreds of organizations across all of the 13 state certified heritage areas. Next slide, please. If you don't know what heritage areas are, I am here to tell you. The state has 13 heritage areas across Maryland. These are locally designated, state certified regional boundaries, which include acreage in all 23 counties and the city of Baltimore. Heritage areas are really established back in 1996 as a way to highlight how Maryland's diverse resources, heritage resources, can be used to strengthen local economies by creating place-based tourism experiences for visitors coming from out of state or across the state, but also for residents and day trippers in nearby communities. Each of the 13 heritage areas are absolutely unique and have their own special focus, goals, objectives, and priorities, and are run by their own individual organizations and management entities. Next slide, please. This map, if you can squint at your screen, shows you where these boundaries are and where the heritage areas are across the state of Maryland. You can see that some of them encompass entire counties or most of a county. Some are more scattered and are specific clumps of resources that have been deemed important to the heritage of that region. If you're unsure, if you're in a heritage area, I urge you to be in contact with me or my colleagues. Our contact information is at the end of this presentation. And I also encourage you to be in touch with the staff at your local heritage area. Again, these heritage areas are run by individual organizations who are comprised of wonderful staff people and directors and other staff who are really a network of resources and information and can help guide you and your organization in your mission and whatever you're doing and the type of heritage that you're preserving or promoting. So there is a list of local heritage area contact information on our webpage on the MHT website. And again, if you haven't been in touch with that person or your area, I highly encourage you to do so. And I'm also happy to make an introduction if that's helpful. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to talk about the grants, which is what you're all here for. So the Maryland Heritage Area Program, like I mentioned, offers capital and non-capital grants to eligible applicants who need to be nonprofits in good standing with the state, a local jurisdiction, or a state and federal agency. After this eligibility requirement, your project must take place within the boundaries of one or more of Maryland's certified heritage areas. Again, if you're unsure, please be in touch with me and I can help verify if your project takes place within those boundaries. These projects should create or enhance publicly accessible, place-based experiences or assets that preserve Maryland's unique stories and contribute to the well-being of local economies. Next slide, please. There are two types of project grants, as I mentioned, non-capital and capital, and I'm going to talk about each of these types and the type of eligible activities that fall under both of these. I also want to mention, and I'll talk about this in more detail momentarily, that all grants from the Maryland Heritage Areas program require a 1-to-1 matching contribution from grantees. Keep this in mind as you're building your budget or thinking about applying to the program. There is a 1-to-1 matching requirement. Next slide. So first I'll talk about capital projects, which we like to think of typically as brick and mortar projects and hope that they have a lifespan of 15 or more years. These are the types of eligible activities here on the screen. We can fund acquisition, development, rehabilitation, restoration, and pre-development activities for your project. Next slide. All capital grants are subject to Section 106 review based on federal law. They also are possibly, or they also will go through an easement review with our colleagues at the Maryland Historical Trust. And depending on if your property or the location where your project is taking place is eligible, could possibly require an easement through MHT. If you have concerns about this or have questions, again, please reach out to me or my colleagues and we can talk about it, and I can certainly put you in touch with the easement program at MHT to talk about this potential requirement. Your capital project does not have to be a historic property. I think this is a common misunderstanding when it comes to capital projects through the Maryland Heritage Areas program, and I want to let you know that it certainly does not need to be historic and oftentimes isn't out of the projects that we fund. You should absolutely have consent from the property owner, and this is a requirement if you were to be awarded a grant. The funding threshold for capital projects is a minimum of $5,000 request all the way up to $100,000 request with a required 1-to-1 match of non-state support. Next slide. Non-capital projects, on the other hand, are typically your education, interpretation projects. So this category of eligible activities funds planning, interpretation, programming, and has a funding threshold, a minimum of a $5,000 request up to $50,000 with that required 1-to-1 match. Next slide, please. So the match, I'd like to provide a little bit more information about this and urge you all, if you're thinking about coming in for a Maryland Heritage Areas program grant, to get creative when it comes to fulfilling the matching requirement. This requirement can be any combination of cash and in-kind funds, staff time, volunteer time, board time, partner time, all spent on the project can count as that in-kind match. And we've seen a lot of grantees able to fulfill that matching requirement very quickly with the time that is spent on the project itself. Donated or discounted goods and services are also a great way to help fulfill that matching requirement. The biggest rule when it comes to matching funds is that other state funds cannot be used to fulfill your match. So if you received a bond bill, or perhaps you have a bill or a grant, from DHCD, for example, you cannot use that as the match for a Maryland Heritage Areas program grant. However, there are other ways to fulfill that requirement, as I just discussed. Next slide. So I just want to give a snapshot of 3 grants to give you an idea of the types of projects that this program can fund. The first is an example of a capital grant in the Lower Susquehanna Heritage area. This is the Colored School Preservation and Restoration Project with the Havre de Grace Colored School Museum and Cultural Center. This is a classic restoration project when we're talking about a capital grant. So funds were used to support critical repairs to waterproofing the basement and roof, and structural and preserving the building structural integrity. So once completed, the repairs will ensure that the building continues to serve the public. There's that place-based, publicly accessible part that's so important to these grants, and will help share the historical significance of this building with the public. Next slide. Here's an example of a non-capital grant in the Patapsco Valley Heritage Area. This is a project with Catonsville Rails to Trails. They have a wonderful trail that runs through the heritage area, and using funds from the program installed trail wayward exhibits, which was actually building upon existing funding to develop the trails themselves that connected various towns and neighborhoods to Catonsville Main Street. So these exhibits will offer interpretive resources and interpretation along the trail. In addition, they plan to have a mobile-friendly website and some self-guided tours for visitors and residents who utilize this trail. Next slide. And lastly, here's another example of a non-capital grant, more of an education focus. This is in the Beach to Bay Heritage Area, and the grant was awarded to the Pocomoke Indian Nation. They created these really cool mobile educational displays, which contained replicas of artifacts used by Native Americans in the region. They used grant funds to pay artists to create those replicas, and then are sending this mobile exhibit to local schools, indoor public spaces like libraries and museums, and are coordinating with some other state agencies to increase awareness of the history of the Pocomoke Indian Nation. Next slide. So the FY27 grant cycle, which is upcoming, here's a snapshot of the time frame that we're looking at for the next grant round, which launches in 2 weeks. So this is a great opportunity for all of you who are on the call, and good timing if you're thinking about a Maryland Heritage Areas Program grant. The program launches in 2 weeks. We do have a 2-step application, and intent to apply forms are due at the beginning of February. This is a very short form that really allows program staff to gauge the interest in the program and to assess your eligibility as an organization and your project's eligibility. And then the full grant application isn't due until the end of March. The applications are then reviewed throughout the spring, both at the local heritage area level and at the state level. And grant applicants, will be notified, and your grant period will begin on July 9th. The fall is when grant agreements will be drafted, emailed, and executed, and when you can expect to see your first payment. So also keep this in mind. If you're developing an application, you may not see your first payment until a few months after your project is awarded. Next slide. If you have any questions, please reach out to me or my colleagues whose names are also on this slide. If you have additional questions about how the application is structured or the criteria for the application, all of that will be published when the grant cycle opens on the 19th. And I'm happy to communicate with any of you either by phone or email if you have additional questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Martha. With that, I wanted to open it up to questions, if anyone has any questions. It looks like Liz. Liz, if you're talking, we can't hear you. You might need to unmute yourself. Still can't hear you, Liz. Maybe try putting your question in the chat. We'll go to Richardson Maritime. Oh, wait, hold on. It looks like possibly Oh, I see. Hold on one second. That's why. Richard, hold on. Richardson Maritime, go ahead. Liz, if you raise your hand again, I can let you. I didn't realize it was set to that.
Hi, this is Debbie Yusuf. I'm chair of the Representative Company. I noticed that the Martha, in your presentation, you said that the non-capital is from 5,000 to 50,000. Am I correct that last year it was to 100,000? And is that a change for this year?
It has not changed. The grant thresholds are the same. So a maximum of 50,000 for non-capital projects and 100,000 for capital projects. I will say that there have been many examples of capital projects that can include non-capital line items. But if the bulk of the project is a capital project, it would be that category. So it's possible that you've seen a capital project that was awarded more than 50,000, and it, again, may include some non-capital components, but overall it's considered capital and then therefore can request up to 100,000. I hope that clarifies.
Yeah, okay, yep, it does, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Debbie.
Liz, did you want to go ahead?
Yes, and thank you. I'm at home, and for some reason my computer wants me to stay on view only. Anyway,
Yeah, I'm not sure how. I must have been a setting that I somehow put on when I created the event, and I'm not quite sure how it did that automatically. But that is, I think, that was a me, not a you.
okay, great. Well, I have a couple of questions about the Museum Assistance Program, and then just a comment about the non-cap. The my first question about museum assistance. The eligibility requirement that an organization have been in operation for 3 years. Can you define what constitutes in operation? Because we have emerging museums that have been out there and been doing stuff, but does that count is really my question. But, you know, may not be four walls ready quite yet.
That is not spelled out clearly in the regulations that I have seen. I think the most straightforward way to interpret that is if they've had their 501c3 status or they have been open under a local government for 3 years, have been in good standing, for example, with STAP for 3 years.
Okay.
We are asking for folks to supply their documentation for nonprofit status. So that is something that we'll be looking at. I think we would also be open to people making the case for their operation in, you know, for example, if they were applying for nonprofit status during that time. We just want to make sure that the museum has a track record before they're coming to us, so they can talk about, you know, their achievements and how this will help them hopefully get to the next level.
Sure, but it sounds like, well, no, it is helpful. And it sounds like, I know in the past, there had been requirements about a minimum number of open days, but that does not sound like it's part of the picture here.
Yes, I don't believe that does not exist in statute or regs. That was probably a policy requirement that was made at one point by the review panel and program staff, because those guidelines can change from year to year, but we don't have that for this year.
Okay, and then this is an easy one, but I just wanted to verify that museums that are operated by a local government are eligible for the program. Is that correct?
Yes, they are. Yep.
Okay. And then my last one on this program is, I want to go back to the question of exhibit development costs as eligible. So does this mean anything like, you know, I'm thinking about the curation of exhibit, writing exhibit scripts, things like that, that I see as non-capital, but are you saying they're just all ineligible?
Um, I think anything, the way to look at this is that it's anything really that has to do with your routine operations. And so if these are updates and plans that you would ordinarily be making to enhance or improve your exhibits, I think that that's completely fine. And in most cases, people will be actually asking for support for staff or
Mhm.
contractual services to do that. And
Mhm.
and in many cases, they won't be enumerating that level of detail, and that's fine. The main thing is that we want to, we're not able to support exhibit design and development leading toward installation of the exhibit. So we're trying to stay away from capital costs.
Okay. Okay. I
Ultimately.
understand that.
Okay.
Thank you. And my very last point, I want to thank Martha for making it clear that the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority is an independent agency within the executive branch of government. And if I missed this, I may have, but I wanted to note that the non-capital funds through MHT are actually sourced and transferred from the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority allocation each year, at least for the time being. So just it's, you know, as a heritage area director, we like people to know that we've helped make those funds available as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Downtown Snow Hill.
Hello. Thank you for this presentation. I have a question about the tax credit programs for commercial buildings. You mentioned a difference between competitive commercial and small commercial. Could you define what is small and what is commercial? And can you also confirm that this is only for restoration and existing structures and not for anything that would be new construction?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So the small commercial program is for buildings that have rehabilitation expenses under $500,000 and that are income producing properties, or what we call a developer pass through, and or can actually be used for cooperative apartment buildings for exterior work and work on the common spaces. But the big defining factor for small commercial is that the amount of expenses you have is under $500,000. For the competitive commercial, the program, one of the main program requirements in terms of eligibility is that the amount of money that you're investing in the rehabilitation exceeds the adjusted basis of the building. And not to go too far down a rabbit hole on this, but the adjusted basis is defined broadly as the value of the building, not the value of the land. So just the value of the building. So if your building is worth $1 million, you're putting at least $1 million into it. And that's why it's typically for these much bigger projects. In terms of eligible work, it is for putting the building back into useful service or maintaining it in useful service. It is not for new construction. So any additions and or new construction are not eligible expenses. Additional questions?
Thank you. That was helpful. Just one clarifying question for the small commercial properties. That's expenses under $500,000. It's expenses in terms of the work required, or expenses that the property. Yeah.
So often the small commercial is like your downtown Main Street buildings. And so, you know, if you need to do something like a new roof and update your HVAC and other systems to bring them up to code, provided all of those expenses are under $500,000, you would be eligible for the small commercial tax credit program.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'm happy to answer questions about specific projects via email if you'd like.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Give me 1 second, Cheryl. You should be able to unmute yourself now, Cheryl.
Yes, hi. Hello, and thank you. This has been a very helpful seminar. I have a question about cemeteries. With the non-cap historical program, would the research for the cemetery be an allowable project under that funding, where we're looking at possible ground penetrating radar, and then the historical maps of cemeteries with tied to ancestral types of people that are still within the church, that kind of thing?
You're talking about the historic preservation non-capital program.
Yes.
Generally, yes. Doing a research project, looking at historic maps and locating historic documents about the cemetery, as well as a ground penetrating radar survey, those would be allowable expenses. The one caveat I will mention with that is that we have a specific standard that we would typically want ground penetrating radar surveys to meet. We've had some problems in the past with utility companies that are really not skilled at locating graves and documenting cemetery boundaries, doing work, and what they're seeing are things like tree roots and other unrelated buried subsurface structures. So we do allow non-capital grants to be used for ground penetrating radar survey, but there's a specific standard, which is on our cemeteries webpage, that we would usually require some, the contractor that you hire to meet.
I see. And then for the repairs of markers and things like that, that's considered capital? Is
That would
correct?
generally be considered capital expenses. Now, you could have an assessment done of the cemetery to determine what it is that you need to do in the future under, and apply for a capital grant for that. But the research to document the problems that the cemetery is facing, that would be an allowable expense, certainly.
Okay. And also I was thinking in terms of the history, how it relates to who's buried there and how it relates to the development of the overall history of the community, that type of report as well.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Martha, did you have something to add?
Yeah, Cheryl, I'll just chime in to say that cemetery research and even ground penetrating radar have been funded by the Maryland Heritage Areas program in the past. To Matt's point, you will need to coordinate with MHT's Office of Archaeology to, make sure that you're complying with the standards of the state. But they have been eligible for funding. I'd say the biggest thing, if you're interested in applying for the Heritage Areas program, is that the end result should really be some type of publicly accessible promotion or application of the information that you've come across. So perhaps, you do the research, you do the ground penetrating radar, and then part of your grant project is to build a website or maybe a mobile app or something like that, so that it is publicly accessible, the information that you found and that history and heritage of the community can be accessed by more people. So we've seen a lot of projects like that have come with a public facing component, or maybe are thinking of a public facing component further down the line, and maybe the research is phase 1. But that's something to think about and possibly something to discuss with the Heritage Area Director where you're located, if that would be a viable project.
Okay, thank you so very much.
No problem.
Stacey, did you have something to add to that as well?
I just wanted to chime into that ground penetrating radar following MHT's supervision is also an allowable capital expense for the AHPP grant and the capital grant. Not the research part, but ground penetrating radar, so long as it's being done to support a capital project, like if you're installing like fencing around a cemetery or doing cemetery conservation, something like that. It's gonna, support a capital project. Delineating the boundaries of a historic cemetery is something that we also can support through those grants, just not the research part.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Paul, I have not forgotten you. You are up now to ask your question. If you're talking, Paul, I think you need to unmute yourself. Are you there, Paul? Okay, we'll circle back to Paul. Dan, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Hey, I'm Dan. I'm actually a contractor. I'm a video producer and interactive virtual tour producer. And actually, Martha, the Catonsville project that you mentioned, I'm involved in that. I'm trying to understand if the types of projects I do fall under the capital stuff, because it sounded like, or the operations. So I just heard the cemetery, you wanted it to come public facing and stuff, and that's kind of the type of projects, media projects that my company works on. So is the type of thing, video production, websites and interactive virtual tour media, is this something that, potential clients, organizations like the rest of the folks here can utilize with these funds?
Yeah, absolutely. We see a lot of tour development, mobile apps, things like that utilized. I'd say, again, the biggest thing is that an eligible organization needs to be a nonprofit or a local jurisdiction or agency. So if you're a for-profit company, offering those services, I think you'd be a great partner for those applicants.
Right. Yeah, I'm not applying, but what I'm trying to do is educate certain, organizations that have a location or something that could show it off online, or with I also do like GPS guided in-person tours and stuff like that. Just kind of like educating them about what I do, and then also say, hey, there's this grant fund available for you to apply for. That's why I'm trying to absorb myself and learn it here.
Yeah, please, share the grant program far and wide with, anybody that you're involved in. I just pasted for anybody on the call, we have a helpful list of the contact information for the heritage area, the local heritage areas, those 13 heritage area management entities that I talked about. Dan, I don't know if you know these folks or have been in contact. They certainly work with a lot of partner organizations that may be developing tours and might be looking for a vendor. So
yeah, this
you're
is
welcome.
A helpful list. The person
and then
Megan Bacco, I just spoke with her yesterday and previously, and I was already signed up for this webinar here, and she recommended I come on it anyway as well. So yeah, this is a great, helpful list. Thank you.
Sure.
Paul, did I see that you managed to unmute yourself?
I figured it out.
Perfect.
I haven't figured out how to make the video work, because I think I have.
That's okay. We just need to be able to hear you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So this is my first opportunity to tune in to the grant programs. And there are several that are of further interest for me for a historical property that I have in Tawnytown. And what I'd like to do is it possible? So guide me through the website as to how I can revisit some of these areas that I'm mostly interested in. Can you suggest how to go to the Maryland Historical Trust website to revisit everything that you've talked about today?
Sure. So what I can do, or what I will be doing, is everyone who registered for this webinar, I'm going to send out a link to the recording and a link to the slides. So if that's at all helpful. And then if you want, what I can also include are links to the different web pages for the different programs in that email. if that's helpful so that you can get directly to the individual pages.
That would be great. I was actually thinking about the slide deck, but I didn't know if you were going to make that available.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it'll be in PDF format and it'll be condensed. So the images will be a little bit grainy and things like that, but you'll have all the words and things like that. So it just won't be as pretty as it looked necessarily today, but it'll be completely readable and you can scan through everything. Any links that were on there, you'll be able to see and things like that. But I am happy to also include in that email links out to all of the different pages so you can get straight to where you want to get to on our web pages, if that sounds like something that would be helpful.
That's a home run for me.
Sounds good.
I do have one question related to the heritage grants. I believe Tawnytown falls into the Civil War heritage area that's administered through the organization in Frederick. Is that the case?
Yes, I believe that Tawnytown is within the heart of the Civil War heritage area. And Liz Chateau joined us earlier. Liz is raising her hand to speak. She's the director of the Heart of Civil War and can chime in.
So, hi, Paul. Yes, Tawnytown is in our heritage area, heart of the Civil War, and we can follow up. I think you're on our mailing list already. I think we've had some communication. I would like to know what your project is. If you're with the museum there, we have worked a bit with Nancy Eiler in the past, but let's just follow up offline and make sure that you all are ready for this upcoming deadline. Thanks, Paul.
I am a member of the and know Nancy Eiler very well. However, I have a separate property altogether that I'm thinking of big aspirations for. And I've met Olivia and then also Emily with the heritage area. So,
right.
And I might have seen you at your big event just a couple of weeks ago.
I was thinking you were there. So yes, I mean, eligibility is going to be, you've got to be a nonprofit organization or a branch of government. But we can talk about it offline, but you know our team, so we're ready to jump in with you and do what we can.
Okay, and that sounds great. And I'm also looking at creating a nonprofit through the Carroll County Community Foundation. So I'm starting to ramp up for all these things that it has potential for me. So I appreciate the webinar today. So
awesome. Talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth.
And then David Roberts in the Q&A asked, where would one go to get info on how to prepare the application for a grant as a first-time grant user? So David, that will depend a little bit on which grant program you are wanting to apply for, because each grant program has slightly different supplemental materials that you need to include in the grant application. But a really great starting point is our grants portal page, which has information about creating your grants account and things like that, which I can also include if you like in that email that I'm sending everyone. So that would be a really good starting point. And then those individual pages will talk about the different materials that you would need to include, and the grants guidelines pages and things like that, or the grants guidelines booklets, for lack of a better word, would also have information about what you would need to include in an application. Martha?
The only other thing I'll add to that question is that I think all of the grant programs do offer info sessions, workshops related to their grant round. I know the Heritage Areas program will be offering a handful of info sessions after the grant round launches in 2 weeks. We'll publish those dates. They're all going to be in January and one in February, I believe, where you can come speak to a virtual. We'll have 3 virtual info sessions and 1 in person on the Eastern Shore. You can come talk to us about your project to get more information. And those, I think, are very helpful to have that face-to-face specific conversation with program staff who can really guide you and dive a little bit deeper than we are here today.
Absolutely. And if you can't attend one of those, they're usually recorded and put on our YouTube channel. So you can always go and watch one of those after the fact, similar to what we'll be doing with this one here today, where you could go and watch this later. We'll put similar recordings for those individual programs up on our YouTube channel. So you can always go watch one of those. And then if you had a more specific nitty-gritty question that you needed to ask a member of staff, you could always reach out to them via email or phone call or something like that to get answers on that. Any other questions from anyone, either in the Q&A or via hands? We only have a couple minutes, so I won't hold everyone hostage for the 4 minutes that we have left. No? All right. Well, then with that, I will say have a nice afternoon. And I hope everyone has a nice weekend and enjoys the little bit of snow that we have. Bye, everyone.